Fred Vasseur has just broke the silence with a brutal statement about Hamilton, and what he said completely changes the way we must understand his 2025 season. This goes far beyond sports. Since the signing of Lewis Hamilton was announced by Ferrari, Formula One entered a state of media euphoria. It was not simply a pilot transfer, it was a symbol. Fred Vasseur said it without ornaments. Maybe we were stupidly naive. We thought that a champion adapts quickly, that the experience supplies the environment, and we are flatly mistaken. The error was of concepcion. It was believed that talent was enough, that a pilot like Hamilton, tanned in 1,000 battles, would not need more than a few laps to acclimatize. But what broke was not talent, but familiarity. And in Formula One, without trust, talent finds no firm ground. The SF25, a car that should offer stability and a competitive platform on paper, has turned out to be a labyrinth of strange sensations for Lewis. From the first test, the feedback was ambiguous. It showed that there was something that did not fit, that it did not flow. But the team assumed it was a logical process. Give him time, he said. They are just adjustments. However, career after career, it was evidence that it was not a simple lag in the adjustments. The pilot himself recognized him privately. The car did not speak to him. I didn't feel his. And that, for a runner like Hamilton, is like running blindly. When Ferrari decided to sign Hamilton, they not only acquired a champion, they bought an entire career philosophy. And they failed by not building the bridge between that philosophy and yours. Vasseur, in his most sincere statement so far, summarizes everything. We did not understand cultural change. We thought that with a week of simulator and some time on track it was enough. But it was not enough. It was like asking a pianist to touch on a tuned keyboard in another language. It is not common to see a 7-time world champion staggering emotionally to microphones. But that was exactly what happened with Lewis Hamilton in Hungary, in which it was perhaps the most crude moment of his recent career. There were no technical excuses, there were no media surroundings. What there was a direct confession. I feel absolutely useless, he said, with the helmet still put and the lost look. That phrase was like a stab to the heart of the paddock. The journalists looked at each other. No one could believe it. Hamilton, the man who had defeated Fernando Alonso, defeated Sebastian Vettel, faced Nico Rosberg and dismantled Valtteri Bottas, was declaring himself broken, emotionally exhausted, sports frustrated, humanly exposed. The most shocking thing was what came later. As if that self-criticism was not enough, Lewis dropped a heavier bomb. He suggested publicly that Ferrari should look for another pilot. The exact phrase was brutally direct. They may need someone different. There was no irony. There was no anger. Only resignation. And when that resignation comes from someone who has built his career based on blind trust in his abilities, something very deep has been broken. This episode was not an isolated slip. It was the culmination of weeks of accumulated frustration. From Australia, Hamilton was already dragging doubts. His adaptation to SF25 did not go to the rhythm he expected. Each attempt to improve the car with its style was how to push a rock uphill. Ferrari, meanwhile, failed to precisely interpret the needs of the British pilot, who is accustomed to a type of technical and strategic dialogue completely different from that handled in Maranello. The differences went beyond the car. They were philosophical. In Mercedes, Hamilton was surrounded by an environment where each small adjustment was discussed millimetrically between engineer and pilot, where the car adapted to the pilot and not vice versa. In Ferrari, tradition is different. The car is the project, the artwork. The pilot must understand it, tame it, adapt to their nuances. That collision of cultures was as invisible as destructive. And all this added the most implacable factor of all, the teammate. Charles Leclerc, despite his own internal battles, managed to obtain poles, extract performance and stay competitive while Hamilton was trapped in Q1. That not only subtracted internal credit, he took away air. He showed the world that, on equal terms, Ferrari's new signing was far from justifying the status he had arrived with. The Hungary GP was only the visible turning point. But the emotional debacle had already been cooking from before. The internal radios revealed to an impatient Hamilton, in constant conflict with the balance of the car. The cameras showed it more and more silent, more isolated in the paddock, less communicative with their surroundings. The signals were there, but nobody wanted to read them. Not himself. It is in this type of moments where the champion aura is tested. When it is no longer about talent or experience, but emotional resistance. Hamilton, throughout his career, had shown himself as an almost impervious figure to failure. I always found ways to return. But in Ferrari that shield cracks. And the most disturbing of all this is that the situation does not seem to have a simple solution. Because what is broken is not a piece of the car. It is the relationship between the pilot and the environment. It is the expectation that was not met. It is the narrative that he himself helped to build, and now threatens to come down. In that context, Vasseur's statement charges another meaning. It is not just a mere technical fault. It is a recognition that they put one of the best pilots in history in an emotional storm without parachute. And now, Ferrari and Hamilton must find a way to rebuild together, if they still want to save this story. After weeks of emotional turbulence, after internal and external criticisms, and after having touched the bottom with statements that froze the entire paddock, the narrative seemed sealed. Hamilton did not fit Ferrari. But then, as with the great rally, something began to change. It was not overnight, nor was it spectacular, but it was genuine. In the last 4 or 5 races, Hamilton's rhythm began to return. It was not the dominant Hamilton of 2020, nor was the aggressive 2012. It was a more mature, more methodical, more calculator. One that did not run with the arrogance of the one who knows that he has the best car, but with the intelligence of who must build each tenth from the pure effort. Fred Vasseur confirmed it with words that almost sounded like relief. I am very happy because he has regained his rhythm. We have made adjustments. And he, especially him, has worked to find his place inside the team. That last sentence is key. Find your place. Because what Lewis has lived in Ferrari has not been just a technical transition. It has been an identity process. The SF25 still is not a car perfectly adapted to its style. But Hamilton has begun to mold the machine, to understand its peculiarities, to synchronize with its strengths and hide their weaknesses. Its evolution on the track is no longer measured by poles or victories, but by how it shortens the distance with Leclerc, how it recovers positions, how it manages the difficult conditions. He has stopped fighting the car to start running with him. This silent rebirth without fireworks is precisely what makes it so interesting. Because we are not talking about a triumphant return to the top. Not yet. We are talking about a paradigm shift. A champion who has had to rallier to compete from disadvantage. But this resurgence has an expiration date. Ferrari is not a patient team by nature. Its history, its political environment, and its media pressure do not allow long adaptation processes. If Hamilton does not translate this new understanding into tangible results, the margin of maneuver will be exhausted. The internal structure needs points, needs presence, needs titles. And Formula One, as Hamilton knows, does not forgive those who take too long to respond. Therefore, this point of the season is not just a technical recovery. It is a critical intersection between two paths, that of redemption or that of sunset. If Lewis manages to continue his ascent and turn that growing connection with the SF25 into podiums, in victories, in real leadership within the team, we could be witnessing one of the most complex and admirable returns of his career. But if, on the contrary, this awakening does not translate into facts, then there will be no other than to accept that the experiment failed. And that, by the caliber of both protagonists Ferrari and Hamilton, would not be a simple calculation error. It would be a permanent scar in the recent history of sport. A brutal reminder that even larger champions can be lost when the environment does not understand them, and when they fail to adapt in time. What happens in the next races will not only be part of one more season. It will be a verdict, and perhaps, the last chapter in the history of the most laureate pilot who has stepped on a Formula One track. Formula One is not only built on curves and speed. It is built on human narratives, about stories that transcend the track. And few stories in the modern era are as powerful as this. Lewis Hamilton, the most successful pilot of all time, fighting his own shadow, trying to reinvent himself in the most hostile and demanding environment of motor racing. Fred Vasseur's words are not just a confession. They are a symptom of something deeper. Of a collective reading error. Of a lack of sensitivity in the management of legendary talents. From a structure that, for wanting to add an idol to its poster, forgot the essentials. That even the champions need time, context, and understanding to perform at the highest level. Today, the F1 world is divided. There are those who believe Hamilton is finished. That his time has passed. That the weight of age and change of environment are crushing it. But there are others, and each time they are beginning to see something else. The slow but firm resurgence of a pilot who refuses to die. That he does not agree to become a note to the foot of his own legend. That still has something to demonstrate. And you, who have come here, are in a unique position to understand it. It is not just about seeing the timetable. It's about reading between the lines. To analyze beyond the stopwatch. Because what is at stake is not one more victory. It is the legacy of an unrepeatable figure. And maybe, the beginning of a second golden era. The big question that leaves us this moment is simple but powerful. Will this be the story of a champion who sank for not adapting, or that of a giant who learned to rebuild when everything seemed lost? Leave me your opinion in the comments. I want to know what you think. Will Hamilton return to the top with Ferrari, or are we attending a farewell disguised as reinvention?